Thank you very much. I'm Jay Olson from Oppenheimer, and Steve Dickman and I are going to be co-moderating this next panel discussion on personalized approaches to treating obesity. And I want to thank Leonard Sachs and his team for an incredibly well thought out agenda today. It set up this panel perfectly. And maybe just to start off from the investor perspective, as you can see here from this slide, obesity therapeutics are really the only disease area within biotech investing that have dramatically outperformed, and has been indicated in previous discussion here today. Obesity went from being essentially uninvestable 10 or 20 years ago to being entirely investable, and in fact the ultimate investment in biotech over the past year. And it's easy to see why, with expectations for, we've heard $100 billion thrown around as potential peak annual sales revenue for obesity therapeutics. I think Enrique said his own personal expectation was $200 billion in annual revenues. And as we all know, most of that is driven at the moment for tirzepatide from Eli Lilly and semaglutide from Novo Nordisk. But there are plenty of other new entrants waiting to emerge, including follow-on products from both Lilly and Novo. But there are also new entrants to the market, including Zealand and Amgen and Viking and many others. And we also heard about what's driving these new entrants and what the opportunity is here. And it's really going to be driven by differentiation. These new products entering the market are going to have innovative new modalities, new mechanisms. They're going to have new indications. They're going to target different subpopulations, different formulations, and different patient experiences. And all of those will contribute to what we think is going to be a personalized approach to obesity. So that's the rationale here behind this panel, and the hypothesis we'll be testing in our discussion. So again, I'm Jay Olson. I'm a sell-side research analyst at Oppenheimer. I used to work at Pfizer for 16 years before I switched to sell-side research. And I have an interest in obesity that I've been writing research about for a couple of years now. And as mentioned, I'm co-moderating with Steve, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Jay, and thanks for the excellent introductory slides. It's a pleasure to be back at a SACS conference in Union Square the weekend before JP Morgan. This is a new SACS conference, and it's thrilling to see so many of you turning out for this, which has already, for me anyway, been highly educational. I would encourage anybody sitting in the back of the room to move up, because it's better when you're closer. Even though we are using microphones, we can see you better and you can see us. With that, I just want to basically welcome our panelists. We're going to have the panelists tell us a little bit about what each of them is doing, and a little bit about what got them into this very hot space of obesity research and treatment. And we have a very diverse panel for you today. We're really excited. And so without further ado, I'll just say I'm Steve Dickman. I'm a consultant in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My firm, CBT Advisors, is the consulting firm that companies call when they need to have their S1 business section drafted. And we've drafted about 200 of those, and we've had 102 of our clients go public on the NASDAQ. So we're very proud of that. And among other business sections that we've drafted, we did the one for BioAge. So I'm going to now turn it over to Dawn. We're just going to go down the table and have everybody introduce themselves and say a little bit about what they do now, what their company does, and how they got into this, please.
Thanks, Steve. So paradoxically, I'm both a serial startup entrepreneur, as well as a big pharma exec. I know those things don't necessarily go together, but I've had a diverse career, and I've spent the bulk of that career either caring for patients with cardiovascular diseases or developing medicines for patients with cardiovascular diseases. I counted up, I've worked on 9 cardiovascular outcomes trials at various capacities over my 30-odd year career. And so I'm super excited to see all of the capital and energy flowing into the obesity space, and I think cardiometabolic writ large is benefiting from that excitement and that uptick in the returns that you showed there, Jay. I started my career at the bedside as an academic clinical pharmacist. I spent several years then at the medicines company working for Clive Meanwell, where I really got a master class in value creation, both for shareholders as well as for society. He's a big proponent of developing medicines for chronic prevalent diseases. And so, again, the call to this obesity opportunity was clear for me. I spent 10 years at Novartis, mostly in development and commercial roles. And I led the Entresto program, which is a $6 billion heart failure program through registration and early launch in phase 3 trials. So currently I'm CEO of Antlia Bioscience, which is in the cardio part of cardiometabolic. So we're developing long-acting injectables for hard to treat high blood pressure, including patients with metabolic disease and metabolic syndrome. And then also I spun Myracle Therapeutics out of University of Colorado Anschutz, which is developing a novel small molecules against a novel target for obesity that's been shown to change the phenotype of adipose tissue from more of a pro-inflammatory energy storing phenotype to more of a metabolically active anti-inflammatory phenotype in knockout mice. And so we are actively pursuing investors for Myracle, and I'll be presenting this afternoon if anybody wants to come and check that out on the afternoon track.
And I just want to jump in here. And say, Dawn, we're so happy to have you. And it's the thing to highlight about Dawn's focus at Myracle is Jay and I had the pleasure of working with her on a panel discussion a few months ago, is that they're focused on adipose tissue. So all of the approaches that we see succeeding in the market today, this is more of a hormonal approach, an all-body approach, if you will. And the focus on the adipose, at our previous discussion, it elicited this huge flowering of other approaches targeting different cell types, which points to both a lot more diversity in the market, but also a lot more need for personalization. Banjo.
Right, one in, one out. Hi, my name's Rajarshi Banerjee. My nickname's Banjo, so please call me Banjo. I'm a doctor from Oxford. I founded a company called Perspectum 12 years ago, which allows AI to look at MRI scans and give you effectively a virtual biopsy. I'm mainly the benefit of good fortune and good timing. So when I trained in medicine, I trained as a cardiologist. And every cardiologist told me not to bother with liver medicine because it was broke. Those guys didn't know what they were doing. They just went around stabbing patients. And some of that is still true. And there was no real market for liver medicine. But then Hep C came along and now MASH. And it's just the evolution in this space, in this city. I once spoke to a Lilly executive in this city, 2016, who said to me, obesity, it's not really a disease, is it? I'm pretty sure that person is no longer at Lilly. And he was Scandinavian, and that is a good reason to distrust basically many Scandinavians. But at least that's woken you up. I'm very happy to talk about precision medicine from the diagnostic and the pathway side. Medically, I still work. In Oxford, we run the Community Diagnostic Center that sees 60,000 people per year. So just think about that. If you're doing a clinical trial in obesity, most of you get sold, 800 patient studies, 200 sites. I could do 800 patient studies, probably 3 weeks while you're working out the budget for the rest of it. So if you look at medicine from the development side and then also from the how does it get to patient side, I think this is the most exciting area in medicine. I'm married to a hemato-oncologist, and she's very jealous of the obesity space right now. That was not the case when we first got together.
That's great. Laurent?
That's great. Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Fantastic panel. I'm looking forward to learning a whole lot more. We had a prep call. I was already impressed with all the stuff that you guys are going to hear about. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself. So I trained as a biomedical scientist, Vanderbilt, Duke, American Heart Fellow, and moved on to pharma, Pfizer, Merck, involved with 9 FDA EMA approvals. And then went on and with a group of fantastic company builders and fundraisers, we built a small number of companies. We've raised $500 million over the past several years and created $5 billion plus worth of market capitalization for these companies. PriveBio is what I'd like to think a next-gen company in the obesity cardiometabolic space in the sense that we're developing first-in-class therapeutics with the coupled readily deployable blood-based assay to measure the target protein that we're neutralizing with our therapeutics. There's a subtext of precision med, and by precision med, we'll talk about this quite a bit, is really going after in a very, I would say, clear way, unmet medical need. So just to kind of foreshadow a little bit about some of my points here is that the Gs have obviously transformed society and health outcomes. There's quite a bit of residual disease, and we're going to get into this precision medicine component. And one of the ways that we actually got into it is some of us on this team of founders that have pulled together PriveBio have done a couple of oncology companies. And so we're sort of preconditioned to this precision oncology, multi-omics, imaging, data integration, very systems-based type of data collection. And so in a titratable way that's fit for purpose for the obesity cardiometabolic space, we're going to talk about how Prive and also how we feel we need kind of a cancer moonshot in that obesity space. We need an obesity moonshot where we're going to be a lot more blunt about the way that we collect data, longitudinal and cross-sectional. So we'll talk about PriveBio and also precision med and obesity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Laurent. Blake?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Blake Salisbury. I'm representing Innovent Biologics. It's a Chinese biotech company. It's a company that was, I'd say, I just want to mention, I've been with Innovent for about 10 years. Before that, I spent almost 25 years with Lilly, doing primarily business development activities. But I joined Innovent about 10 years ago, went to China, lived there for 5 years, helped this young biotech company in China to grow a pipeline, mainly through in-licensing products into China. And now our company has built a really strong research foundation, and we've got 4 or 5 medicines that are about ready to go into the clinic in the obesity space, cardiovascular metabolism. Very exciting stuff, first-in-class approaches. And now I'm on the side of selling those to the global market, looking for multinational partners, for ventures, investors that want to help get our molecules outside of China into the global market. So it's been exciting. I would just mention, we haven't heard a lot of this, but representing the China biotech in obesity is important. I mean, there's probably as many obese patients in China as there are in the U.S., and sometimes we forget that from a straight patient number. The Chinese don't, they don't come across as typically obese or overweight, but 10% of 1.4 billion is a lot of people, right? So anyway, doing that, I wanted to mention that the thing that brought Innovent into the obesity space was a deal that I helped do with Lilly back in 2019. Enrique was on a panel about 2 times ago. He was the head of biomedicines at Lilly at the time, and our diabetes. And he actually sponsored Innovent doing this deal with Lilly in the diabetes obesity space. Innovent had done an oncology deal with Lilly back in 2015 that I did when I was on the Lilly side. But Enrique saw that Innovent would be this good partner to take this phase 1 drug that looked to be as good as Mounjaro, as tirzepatide, but it was about 6 months to a year earlier than tirzepatide in development, and Lilly didn't want to have to put so much money into co-development of 2 assets. And so they said, let's give this drug to this Chinese company, let them take it forward in China, do what they can, and if tirzepatide ever runs into a problem or gets a developmental setback, we'll then switch to mazdutide, this drug that we in-licensed, and they'll have a lot of data generated from what we would do in China. So Lilly kind of gave it to us as an insurance plan in China, and we've run with it. We've now finished phase 3 in China. We've submitted it. We're hoping the next 2 or 3 months that mazdutide will be one of the first GLP analogs to be approved in China. It's a GLP GCG. And the phase 3 results look better than tirzepatide in terms of the weight loss that you get. And so anyway, that's why we're here. Innovent's in the obesity space. I'm excited about it. And I would say this personalized approach, I have a unique individual perspective take that I took Mounjaro myself for about a year, starting 2 years ago, lost 25% of my body weight, went from BMI of 31 down to normal. I was very happy with it, pleased with the results, but then I couldn't get it because Mounjaro was so hard to access in the U.S. market, right? I just wasn't available at the pharmacy. So I went back to China in April and asked my CEO if I could join a phase 4 study for the Innovent drug in China, mazdutide, and he agreed. I went through all the form of getting onto that study, and I had been taking mazdutide for about 8 months. So I can compare tirzepatide, what it was like from a personal, side effect standpoint, muscle loss, worrying about muscle loss because you lose weight so fast, and you just wonder if you're going to lose the wrong type of weight, and then stopping it, gaining 30 pounds in 4 months, right? And then going back onto the Innovent drug and losing 30 pounds in 3 months on the Innovent drug, and now being maintained nicely for about 7 months on kind of a maintenance approach. So I'm very interested in knowing how we do personalized treatment because the answers aren't there, right? Maintenance, adipose, how to target these to lose the right kind of weight and do it for the right type of person. I'm excited about the whole space. Thanks. Too much, but.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for those introductions. Super helpful. Great broad diversity of perspectives on the panel and really rich discussions leading up to this panel. We heard a lot of different ideas supporting our thesis that, everyone's obesity is different in terms of where they gain the weight and what the implications are and what therapies they'll respond to. And so I guess one question we wanted to pose to our panel, we've heard about different genotypes, different phenotypes of obesity, different comorbidities of obesity. The question that we have for you is, how would you segment the obesity market? And maybe there might even be different segmentation tools for the purpose of the initial diagnosis versus tracking and monitoring progress, maybe identifying maintenance therapies, and possibly even different segmentations for reimbursement purposes. So it's a long-winded way of saying, how would you, each of you on the panel, segment the obesity market?
Yeah, I don't know if we really have the tools to do it well yet, Jay, to be honest with you. I certainly think of some big buckets like age. So if you have like early onset severe obesity, you're going to be looking at some genetic causes, potentially even monogenic diseases. I think in the elderly, I'm going to be much more worried if I'm a clinician about lean muscle mass preservation because we know that, they may have less reserves, especially patients over 60. So I might want to think about something that's more lean mass sparing or, maybe not do a GLP-1 in that particular patient population or do it very carefully with, good dietitian support so you have protein intake is maintained. I think severity is a really important one. I really appreciated the panel discussion this morning that, look, this what did Myracle call it? The obesity Olympics, like where everyone's sort of racing for more and more efficacy. We don't need that kind of efficacy in everyone, right? Like most people are going to be in that 15, 20% weight loss or 10 to 20% weight loss. That's where we see the outcomes benefits. But there's still going to be the class 3 obese patient where, if the medicines get good enough, maybe, they don't all need bariatric surgery or it's an option, an alternative to bariatric surgery. And as a society, maybe we should get those patients on treatment first, right? Like really prioritize that. I don't know. It's a thought. So I think we don't have tools to really do it well, but there's some big buckets that we might think about to start.
So I'll put on my doctor hat and sort of do it almost as an individual consultation because that's the best kind of segmentation. People don't go to see a doctor, certainly not in the UK, with obesity. They go usually with symptomatic problems or because someone has made them. Their employer, the government encouraging everyone age 40 to go have a health check, or some concerned member of their family. So you either get someone coming in who's reluctant or someone who's symptomatic. So you can segment starting there. So you have your reluctant patient who either has symptoms but doesn't admit them, whether it's breathlessness or less able to jog or work or rush for the bus or whatever. And then you have your symptomatic patient who accepts those symptoms. So I remember when I first started medicine, we work in a hospital that has 9 floors, and I used to race my consultant up the stairs. And I used to beat him, and that was pretty much the only part of the day where I would outperform that guy. The roles are now reversed. Yeah, we have juniors that outperform me definitely on the stairs, probably in other aspects of the ward round as well. But when you look at those symptoms, this comes down to some of the talks earlier, the pediatric talk earlier, and earlier when we talked about the diseases linked to obesity. If you have breathlessness from heart failure, that's segmented. That's an area that will be reimbursed well. If you have liver disease, that's a more controversial segment because it's a new entity. We haven't worked out what to call it yet. There's too much Latin in the terms, but that's a separate segment. If you have kidney disease, that's a separate segment as well. And then when these segments overlap, that is a complicated patient to manage. And the biggest problem we face, which means that that sort of medical segmentation isn't brought up enough, is we just don't have enough doctors to look after those kind of patients. So you can look at it in terms of $200 billion, hundreds of millions of patients, but when you look at it as one-to-one, treating obesity at the moment is difficult, and we haven't really grasped the systems we will need to deal with it. So you mentioned, Dawn, the tools. You know, in the UK, we've started something called a UK Biobank project on proteomics. We're going to do proteomics on 100,000 people. There is not a single hospital in the UK that can do proteomics today. There is definitely no general practice service that can do it. So that is at least 20 years of being used. So for your drug coming on the market next year, it's a totally useless piece of technology, right? We need to get blood tests and scans that can be delivered in the community to patients in a time frame that will suit the investors in this room. So if you've got a 3 to 5 year time frame, don't be reading about proteomics or stuff like that. It's not going to work. If you've got an evergreen fund with a 10 to 20 year time frame, then you can sit down with the proteomics guys and really take that space. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So this is great. And actually, let me try to build on this and maybe offer some additional facets. So I love the idea of let's play the movie forward 5-10 years down the road. So when we talk about proteomics, I do agree that we have to be careful not to be boiling the ocean. However, the use of specific targeted blood-based markers that can potentially be surrogates of a larger disease process, I think that's in the 3 to 5 year framework. At least that's what we believe, and that's what we're building. Now, that requires a whole lot more data than we've got, and I'm going to get on my soapbox on that front. I think we've got a bit of a data issue, which is in part underpinned by a lack of data strategy across all sorts of stakeholders in our ecosystem. The data are incomplete, fragmented, and that means that unfortunately companies that want to play in that precision med space over the next 3-5+ years are going to need to do the right studies. And then ultimately, and thinking back to the draft guidance from FDA that we talked about a little bit earlier today, we're going to have to lead the conversation, because when you read that guidance, right, we're not in the omics world when it comes to obesity and cardiometabolic diseases, right? So it's going to be costly, right? And it's going to take time and dedication and belief. So I do think that a fit for purpose omics type of fingerprint is in the cards in that near term, so let's call it the 3, 5, 10 year time frame. So that's one point that I just wanted to highlight. But then going back, Jay, to your question, I'm going to offer maybe a framework here, which is around metabolic dysfunction. So I don't know how many of you typically get a lot of your, Chem 20 and collect all sorts of data, but if you go to CES, as recent as this year's CES, digital health, collecting all sorts of data points, right, via urine collection, blood, that's with us, right? And the trouble is we don't really know what we're going to do with all these data, but that's where we're moving, right, is more ownership of our data, more data points collected. And so I can envision in the next 10 years or so, a lot of us having basically clinical chemistry data readily available at our fingertips. And so you can imagine then, going back to actually the previous presentation from Dr. Corner, this segregation of metabolically healthy obese versus metabolically unhealthy obese, right? That's one potential framework. And those trajectories of comorbidities for the MHO versus the MUOs are quite different. Now, it doesn't mean that an MHO, a metabolically healthy obese individual, is basically transitioning to a MUO. About 50% of the MHO will become MUOs over the next 4 to 20 years. So what happens to these 30, 50%, right? What are the other aspects? And that's what precision medicine is going to do, right? It's going to help us figure out those trajectories, and we're going to get there step by step. So I don't think precision medicine for obesity, cardiometabolic is going to look like precision oncology in 2025 in 3 years. And I think we're going to have to adapt it to our disease space, but I think we're going to get there. And I'm a little bit more optimistic on how quickly we're going to get there, but I think it's going to require company leadership, working closely with academics, integrating data, and really putting the dollars in order to get the right claims on the label related to precision medicine.
And I guess maybe if I could build on that, I also think that how it will look different from precision oncology is it won't be solely genetics based. I think genetics based is important, but I think to your point, there'd be more serum biomarkers that could point to patients who are higher risk for disease, who may be better suited for one type of intervention over another. So it's going to be more of a mixed profile than a pure get tissue, get genetics type of profile.
I'll just make a few comments. I think based on what I see in the development of the pipeline, right, I think we're still a ways off of precision oncology, right? I think the drug developers they're looking at molecules that maybe do more fat loss than muscle loss, so they're trying to stratify that. But the discovery scientists only have so many tools and things they can deal with, and doing a genetics-based kind of stratification, why would you do that if you can do an all-comers trial and get everybody to take it? So the dollars are going to drive how these are developed. And I think that, the key questions are answered. How do you do maintenance on these, right? The first companies that can really come out and show this is the way to maintain your weight loss, they're going to win, right? And so we just need to keep that in mind. I also think the most important stratification is how to pay for it, right? I mean, for me, when my insurance wouldn't pay for Mounjaro and it was $1,200 out of my pocket per month, you have to wonder how long can you do this, right? And you have to be pretty motivated. Most people just can't do that, and something has to change with reimbursement for these things really to become.
So can I ask you a question, Blake, about that? Because I'm very curious about your story around maintenance. And do you see like a different drugs for induction versus different drugs for maintenance, or is it more dosing levels? How do you think that?
I mean, for me, it's the dollars that drive it, right? When you're spending $1,200 a month and it's time to now maintain your weight loss, you take it every other week instead of weekly. And then you take it every 3 weeks, and then you take it every month. But you start finding out when you take it every month, the side effects that hit you, because the blood levels will completely wash out by the time you take the next shot. It hits you pretty hard. And so the companies that can give a smaller dose for maintenance more frequently, they need to do that.
So I'm going to give a medical analogy for this that I think is very relevant and may help us. Because at the end of the day, you're right, reimbursement matters and drives it. If you have an organ transplant, kidney, liver, heart, doesn't really matter. Well, it matters to you, but for this analogy, it doesn't matter. You're started on immunosuppression, which is really expensive, but it's also really unpleasant. And you titrate that immunosuppression with basically, you try and ride in the middle of the road, and you've got a wall on each side. If you're under immunosuppressed, you have rejection, which is a disaster because then you need another transplant, and it's horrible. And if you over immunosuppress, you're at risk of death from catching infections. So you've got to be in the middle of the road. Now that's a form of precision medicine. That's a more scalable form than, a specific kind of genotype for a specific kind of cancer that's only treated in like 4 hospitals in the world. Because lots of people have post-transplant care. And it's done pretty well. And it's done with a combination of clinical acumen, scalable practice with advanced nurse practitioners, patient awareness, good scans, and good blood tests that are commonly available. Okay? Now, that for me is a perfect paradigm to take into obesity. You want to work out exactly who you're going to treat and why you're going to treat them. And do you want the obesity treatment that treats kidney and heart disease or best, or the obesity treatment that treats liver and pancreatic disease the best, or someone who's really unlucky, all four? When you treat them, what's the best induction, which may be different from the best maintenance? And how do you monitor them to make sure that you're in the middle of the road? Now, in obesity, compared to transplant care, I think the road is a lot more broader. So that's the good bit. Yeah. However, there's a lot more traffic on the road. There are a lot more patients. And the traffic is not all uniform. It's not just cars. There are automobiles, there's probably some kind of four-legged creatures there, and there's probably some kind of airplanes. It's a much more heterogeneous condition. But that kind of thinking of you can get it right, it requires some investment, but the risk from not getting it right is quite big. And that's where I think you then come to reimbursement. Because if you fail on an organ transplant, that's like $500,000 instantly and or a lawsuit. So everyone does get it right. Likewise with obesity, if you fail and you end up needing a kidney transplant or needing a pancreatic transplant, that's where I think it comes to play. Where it falls down slightly on this analogy, and this is where the type of vehicles on this road matter, it's not one type of transplant you might end up needing. So in liver disease, one of the reasons we often mess up sometimes on the health economics is we focus purely on liver outcomes. And we did a pivotal study on UK Biobank on liver outcomes. In 7,000 people with fatty liver disease, which is one of the phenotypes and not the only one of obesity, you get something like 30 liver outcomes over the course of 4 years. But to get to those 30 liver outcomes, you go past 492 cardiac outcomes. So if you treat liver disease, actuarially, what you're really doing is you're treating heart disease or preventing heart disease. But if you go to the FDA, they only want to look at, currently, liver outcomes. So you get your clearance based on liver outcomes, but you get your reimbursement based on preventing heart disease. That's how I think it all comes together. But that requires people in this community to work together. So it requires the payers to understand why you're looking at preventative medicine. And within companies, and 3 of you have drug companies, it requires your regulatory teams to also work with your market access teams ahead of just getting an indication.
Banjo, thank you. That's fascinating. And this is exactly why we wanted to have this discussion today. And I especially love all of the different flowers blooming here. We talked about the prioritization of patient stratification. Who's a more severe patient? Should they get access to a drug that's hard to access? Induction phase versus maintenance phase. We talked about maintenance of therapy and resistance that evolves to the therapy, either because it's unpleasant or because the patient's bodies aren't tolerating it that well. And then, of course, there's cost, the wallet biopsy. So we have all these things going on that we need to measure. There have to be data streams that are measuring these things in order to anticipate it. My question for the panel, my provocative question is, we had a panelist from one of the 2 leading marketers of obesity therapies in the room this morning. What I love about this conference, we got the right people. And that person, the head of business development globally for Novo, said, we have currently tens of millions of patient days of data flowing into our database right now from patients on Ozempic. And we expect soon to have hundreds of millions of patient days of data. And it triggers the question, and this is my question for the panel, well, who owns that data? And who is motivated to actually turn it into usable, widely available diagnostics that will allow patients to decide for themselves if they belong on therapy? I mean, think about diagnostics. There are different ways to do diagnostics, and there are really expensive ways like imaging, and then there are much less expensive ways like blood tests, but then there are even more accessible ways like the iPhone, where each patient has a tool in their hand that's basically a supercomputer that might be able to do a little bit of diagnosis and see whether they're on the right track. And so with all these different modalities, it seems a bit unfair to me, over to the panel, that 2 companies would own all the data. Is there any effort anywhere to try to prevent this from happening? Or is there any bottom-up initiative that's going to turn this into much more of a democratized, accessible data set? Laurent.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. This is a great point here. So I'll give you a perspective as a consumer of those data because we are going to be so dependent on this. So, like most of you, we hoover up all the publicly available data sets and do our data crunching analysis and ultimately, actionability plan. I don't believe right now, and you should ask the pharma stakeholders here, that there's really any sort of global initiative to try to create sort of a federation of all the data out there. So that's a big problem, right? And there are so many issues, right? And we've seen this. It's not a today problem, right? It's just been going on for decades. So I would love it if we could create these private-public partnerships. And that's maybe kind of one perspective there, Steve, and everyone else on the panel, is that let's do something about it, right? And yeah, it's everyone's data in some ways, and I'm sure there are ways to reward everyone, even if some folks contribute a lot more than others. And we can anonymize. There are blockchain now platforms that can take care of all that patient, name and social security number. So that's not the issue anymore in the way of doing the right thing. So I'm not aware of any of that. We spent a lot of resources looking at UK Biobank, Decode, Hermes, ARIC, Dallas Heart Study, Framingham, you name it. But very often, a lot of the pharma data are kind of out of bounds and
siloed.
And we have to work extra hard to access it. And then it's a special relationship with some constraints. So we love those kinds of conversations, and we would love for those kinds of partnerships to occur. And I think it's us, right? Because I don't think there's anything going on out there that is going to deliver on this, as far as I know. But there might be. So I'd love to learn from the panel on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I've spent numerous hours on this topic when I was at Novartis trying to collaborate with academics who wanted access to some of our data, and it is a painful process, I can tell you. So there are absolutely portals, and there are ways and processes in place where most companies will make their data available to researchers for specified hypothesis generation, and you have to work within a certain cloud, environment, et cetera. I don't recall the different details, but there are mechanisms to do that, but it's hard, to Laurent's point. Who owns the data? Well, certainly the person who paid to have it generated and pays to store it owns it. I can tell you who does not own it and has the patients it came from. And that is, I think it's a moral problem that we have in the medical field and in the medical research field. Personally, I feel very passionate about that. Who actually owns your data? But data is the new oil. So why am I going to share my oil that I paid to drill for with you unless there's something in it for me? And I mean, I think that's the bottom line. And unless there are regulatory reasons to do so, which is why some of those data can be accessed publicly, there's really not a lot of incentive unless you're in partnership with that company to bring therapies to market or something.
Well, excuse me, Benjo, let's just hit that partnership. So, I mean, one thing, again, I love about these conferences, Leonard's conferences, is that they bring startups in the room with big companies. And it seems to me that the startups would be the ones that would be incentivized to aggregate data and to come up with financeable modes, business models that could then tap into the pharma data. It just seems silly to me that you would expect pharma, with all the priorities that they have, to also be doing this, essentially when it's not even necessarily in their interest.
I think the issue is that they don't want to share.
Yeah.
I mean, not only because it's valuable and they're worried about giving away value, but they've also are under contractual obligations to keep that data private for many reasons. There are consent forms in trials, European regulations, which are much more strict than US regulations around data privacy. It's a warren.
Do we expect to ever see a 23andMe for obesity data bottom up? Banjo.
So hopefully, Dawn, will make you happy. It is totally possible for patients to own their data. It's very, very easy. In fact, it's one of the Perspectum's key tenets is any data we collect is done with patients' explicit consent. So if you do that, this is where I think you do make it. For those of you who've seen Rocky IV, this is a Rocky IV moment, okay? And if you haven't seen Rocky IV, then you should really go watch it this afternoon. If you set up a trial such that patients explicitly consent to give their data, and then at the end of the trial, you share the results down to the patient level data back with them. So, Dawn, if you take part in a trial, you were on the placebo arm and this happened or whatever, right? and then you give them the full, you are now educating your exact target market if you are a pharma company, right? Pharma companies and biotechs spend a fortune, including Perspectum, on medical affairs teams to educate doctors in the hope that doctors will then communicate that to patients. And our doctors constitute, we think, some of the most educated people in our communities, myself included. I like that bit. But the flip side is any medical affairs team will tell you they have to engage a message with the doctor 7 times for it to land. Well, hang on, that doesn't work out, but never mind. Why not engage with your patients directly? And the beauty with obesity is it is easier to access because you have more time. If someone gets a diagnosis of breast cancer and needs a decision made quickly, they don't have much time to engage with the service. Now, Lilly's cracked this. Lilly's got Lilly Direct, which I think will be a massive entity, yeah? Because it's basically cutting out the PBMs, the middle, they're Mark Cubaning obesity, yeah? And I think that's the way forward. But the quid pro quo of that is they will have to communicate with their patients directly. Now, so that hopefully for you answers the question is you can consent and partner with patients directly, and that's where blockchain comes in, because actually that's how you can communicate the progress of your trial. And there's a guy called Alex Kahana, who I think is based in Washington and New York, and he does this not just in the United States, but in sub-Saharan Africa, Polynesia, and places like that. So it's very easily deployable. The other issue is, I think, with a lot of this, if you think about commercial success, it has to happen at scale. So if it's going to happen at scale, I'm not anti-technology, patented technologies, brought them to the market. I'm very pro-technologies, but you've got to think of the life cycle of your technology. So Perspectum's a platform company. We've got stuff that will make money today. Liver multiscan, for example. We've got stuff that we think will make money in 3 to 5 years, some of our more development techniques. And we've got a cancer platform that we think will make money probably in 8 to 10 years. My point is the same investors who want the cancer stuff probably don't give much of a hoot about the quarter-to-quarter variation in the liver stuff. And the guys that care about the liver stuff probably don't like the 8 to 10 year horizon. So within your own companies, you have to navigate that tension between your investors, your developers. The person I have in my company with the longest horizon is aged 80. So I have to manage that.
Thank you, Banjo. Other answers about where the data could be owned and how this could be done better?
I just say from our perspective, I think we're years off of being interested in data. I think U.S. company startups are probably more focused on that. We're just focused on trying to make better drugs than everybody else is making right now. And it's what are they focusing on, whether it's fat versus muscle, whether it's how long it's going to work, how tolerability. Those are the things that we care about today.
All right, we're going to ask each of our panelists to look into their crystal balls now. And Laurent, you touched upon what you think could happen in the next 3 to 5 years. We're going to ask each of you to look out 10 years from now. In an ideal world, what does a personalized approach to treating obesity look like to you?
Well, Jay, as Yogi Berra said, predictions are hard, especially about the future. So I don't want to make predictions because I'm not really good at that, but I do have hopes, right? And I hope that our industry will spend about half as much, invest about half as much as we're investing now in known targets into novel targets. So I'd like to see us work to unravel this biology better and give us more tools to really understand, the different drivers, the biological drivers that are present in different patients with biology. I also hope that some of these drivers that we could unlock from really understanding the biology better could actually prevent obesity, especially when we hear about what's happening with children and with pediatric obesity. And if we can prevent it before it happens, then I think that we'll be in a much better place. So I'd like to see that.
This panel was arranged in the right order. My prediction, and it synergizes with my hope, is that people will start to tackle childhood and adolescent obesity. We've got the drugs coming through. People are nervous about trying them in people whose bodies are still developing. But I think you gave us, Jay, a 10-year horizon. So if people get on with it, I think we can start to address things. We did do a study in Mexico City. 4% of boys under the age of 10, I have a 9-year-old son, so boys his age have MASH. We did it with scans. It's not that expensive. You just have to want to do it, right? They said it in the earlier panels. There's still a stigma around adult obesity. Is it just because I like cakes too much or Chinese food or whatever? But you can't blame a 9-year-old for being obese. So therefore, that's a market that governments and agencies can get behind. And if pharma goes after it, the CSO of the pharma company that solves or at least addresses childhood obesity, that's like an instant double Nobel Prize. So my hope is in 10 years' time, that's what we'll be featuring here.
Great. So maybe in 5-10 years, so obesity innovation, I think it's obesity innovation and comorbidities. So I think, for us, we call them the Gs. That's backbone therapy, and I hope that we're not going to be too complacent on where we are with the Gs, and I don't think we are, and all of us sort of speak to the next wave of innovation. So I do think that if we could be in a position where we're able to trace a trajectory for a patient with a BMI of 35 who's 25, or a BMI of 35 who's 55, and be able to put some risk around chances of CKD, chances of HFpEF, chances of MASH, I think that would be great, because then we can get upstream of that and say, okay, now you should be on the next liver MASH medication. And it's not just anybody with a BMI of 35 who's automatically going to be thought about in that way. So I do think that precision med could be at that next level. I think the genomics and the omics conversation is equally important, but that's like level 3, 4. I think there's some challenges around ethnicity, sex, gender that we haven't even talked about because we're running out of time here. But I do think we have to be a little bit more sophisticated. We've done some work ourselves on South Asians with a fixed BMI compared to a Caucasian at that same BMI. Their trajectories on some of these blood markers completely different. These patients will not be treated, should not be treated, but might end up being treated like everybody else. So I think there's a level of level 1, 2 sort of precision med that we shouldn't gloss over. And I think the omics conversation, I 100% believe in it. But I also have to catch myself that, it's not tomorrow. This other stuff is maybe tomorrow and will have impact in 10 years.
I think in 10 to 15 years, we're going to have 20 to 30 agents that people can choose from, and they're going to be trying to figure out how to, which patient gets which one and which makes most sense and all these questions. But I think that the drugs that are going to be most interesting are going to be combination approaches. I mean, GGG, PCSK9, it's putting the cardiovascular with the obesity in a single molecule, making it so people don't have to take 6 pills. They can just take one drug, take it once every 6 months, an siRNA approach, something like that. Be great. Optimistic future.
Thank you. So before we wrap, we thought we would take one audience question. If somebody has one that can be expressed in 1 sentence or less. If not, we're just going to say thank you. We really enjoyed this, and we're all going to keep learning about this so that we can do it even better next year. Thank you so much to the panelists and to the SACS conferences.
Thanks, everyone.